Good evening. This is RFD TV Live. I'm your host, Nicole Murphy. We have a very special program tonight, a bit different from our typical show. We're going to talk about telecommunications in rural America, especially high-speed internet access, which is often referred to as broadband. We'll talk about what broadband is, why it matters, and what it takes to make it available in more widely in rural communities. Now, first we'll be speaking with Jill Thompson via satellite. Now, Jill, as a former member of Congress and former Undersecretary of Agriculture, do you see rural development issues like access to modem technologies becoming as important as commodity programs for rural communities?
Well, I do, and I think you know that my husband and I farm in Indiana, and we believe that farm programs are very important, not just to producers, but to anybody who eats. It's important to the rural community that we are a part of, but equally important, and in some ways maybe even more important, is making sure that we have broad policy that works for rural communities. And telecommunications policy is very, very important to rural America. It's important because if we're going to be competitive in this century, we need high-speed internet communication in the same way that we needed electrification in the middle of the last century.
Absolutely. All right, thank you. I have a next question for Dr. Greg Powell. Now, let me ask you this. What is distance learning?
Those are the web-based courses. And that's actually the most popular at my institution. Half a dozen years ago, we had an enrollment of about 300 in online classes. This past year it exceeded 3,000. We expect it to exceed 4,000 this next year.
Now, there are areas in the country where it is difficult to access with bandwidth necessary for distance learning?
That's exactly right. I think that is the major impediment to growth in this area. If you're on campus, or if you can get to a library that can provide you with that high-speed internet, you're in great shape. Otherwise, you're going to probably grow old trying to do it through dial-up networking.
I also have a question for Leroy Watson. How did the Grange get involved in telecommunications?
We see advanced telecommunication services, and particularly broadband, as one of the keystone technologies of the 21st century. They're going to make or break whether or not rural communities are going to be competitive.
Wow. And now, how can modem telecommunications make a difference in these rural communities?
Well, rural communities need access to the types of services and technologies that telecommunications can bring us. Not only are there commercial opportunities, getting in touch with your clients, your customers, but also we think the ability to provide services that people need, particularly government services, access to basic education, to health care, to public safety, are all going to depend on access to telecommunication services if we're going to have viable rural communities.
And now what about video? How does it play into the broadband future?
Video, like telephone before it, is going to act as a kind of a carrier service for the expanded opportunities, just as plain old telephone service brought us access to the internet via dial-up modems. Video services is going to bring us access to broadband services as well.
Wow, all very impressive. Now, the next question is for Chris McLean. Now, President Bush set a goal for universal broadband by 2007. Can that get done?
Well, it's going to be a challenge. But what it takes is to get all the pieces right in order to get folks to invest in telecommunications, and as well as consumers to be interested in subscribing. So we have to get the regulations right, we have to get the investment incentives right, and we have to get the policies and the content just right. And we do think, as Leroy said, that video could be a real key driving force here, because people like their television. They love television, and they want, and they're willing to pay for the latest and greatest in television
Joining
access.
us on the panel this segment is Dan Pythian, Policy Director and General Counsel of the Alliance for Public Technology, a group of nonprofit organizations that promotes access to communication services and technologies. Prior to that, Dan served in a key position at the Federal Communications Commission. Welcome, Dan.
Thank you.
Now, I have a couple of questions for you, of course. As you well know, Congress is considering legislation on reforming, as you just mentioned, those telecommunications laws. What will that be really a big help to these rural areas?
It will. I think, again, not only rural areas, but broadband deployment generally. What the Senate bill, one of the key things the Senate bill focuses on is streamlining the video franchising process. Part of the problem right now is that our current laws and our regulations govern different services depending on the technologies that are used to deliver them. Of course, broadband, which is a digital form of communications, converges so many of these services into one pipe, whether it's a wireless or a wired pipe. But the regulations haven't kept pace. So the Senate bill would help streamline the video franchising process, get broadband out to consumers quicker. Prices will be lowered as competition emerges, and that
Right.
new investment and new competition will really help drive broadband deployment.
Now, if you don't mind, Chris, we're going to go to a caller. Jim from Texas on the phone line. Good evening, Jim. What do you have for us?
Good evening. My question is, I understand what broadband is, but there's multiple ways of receiving it. I can do it over a telephone line. They're talking about doing it over your electrical line, and then there's wireless. And I'm wondering if we're looking at all of those options for us in the rural areas.
Oh, absolutely. We're seeing microwave technologies being used, satellite, and they all need to work together. In some places you're going to be lucky. You're going to have choices of several different opportunities. In other towns and communities you may only have one choice. They say there's one thing worse than a monopoly, and that's a no-opoly. And too many rural Americans are left behind. So the combination of incentives to companies to invest, strong universal service policies, and a good regulatory environment is going to be able to make it possible to bring multiple technologies to as many places as possible.
Now, joining us by remote is Senator Sam Brownback. The senator is from the great state of Kansas.
Pleasure to join you. And thank you for getting that great state in there. That was great to hear.
Hey, I aim to please around here.
But one thing I want to point out to people is that historically the United States government has made sure that everybody could take advantage of technologies when they come online. So that when telephone were just coming out, we put in the rural telephone services, and we put loans out there to be able to help with that. We did that with rural electrification. We need to do that with broadband. And I hope the people that are watching this will contact their legislators, their members in the House and their members in the Senate side, Republican and Democrat, and say this is important to pass. And urge them to push this on forward, whether we get it done before the election or in a lame duck session. This is something we need to do, and it will be helpful to rural America. It's going to be helpful to the entire country, but we got to push it on forward, and I hope they'll contact us and their members to get things done.
Chris, you have anything to say in closing?
Well, I just want to thank you for having us here at RFD TV, and we just got to keep the progress going, and legislatively and in the hometowns and small towns of rural America.
We appreciate you tuning in tonight, and stay tuned for more editions of RFD TV. Thanks. Good night.